Millionaire exposes the incredible truth behind little girl's heartbreaking cry, "Daddy, my arm." Mark Reynolds, a pillar of success in his suburban enclave, had always believed his life was free from the disorder of his childhood. But that chilling afternoon, as he hurried through the park during lunch, the stark reality of his carefully constructed world shattered. A haunting wail ripped through the air, and it took only seconds for Mark to recognize the source. It was his daughter, Emily. Curled on a bench, her little frame racked with sobs, she was the embodiment of heartbreak. "Daddy, my arm," she had choked out through tears that struck like knives to his heart. At that moment, something shifted within him. Mark felt the foundations of his life tremble. Years of hard work, the striving to escape his father's worried face, lost all weight in the presence of his daughter's anguish. He could feel the full force of vulnerability surging through him, a maddening combination of fear, guilt, and an urgent determination to shield Emily from harm. How could he protect her when the very society he fought so hard to rise above seemed poised to crush her with ignorance and cruelty? Every recollection of his childhood, every sacrifice made by his father rose to the surface, mixing with a dread he couldn't articulate. Would he ever feel completely free of the circumstances that forged him, now that his daughter faced bullying because of her congenital condition? Already, the pressure of societal perceptions hung heavy in the pit of his stomach. This initiated the worst moral dilemma he had grappled with. How could an architect trained to push boundaries and create dreams be powerless in protecting his child from cruelty? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. As he sat there beside Emily, offering as much comfort as he could muster, the unshakable awareness of his own shortcomings consumed him. What if he failed her? That fear was amplified by the glaring reality he had built a reputation, a life he was proud of, yet this very system he had navigated now threatened the happiness of his child. His career, so intricately crafted by precision and perseverance, felt hollow in the face of her tears. The looming town hall meeting sat darkly on the horizon like a storm cloud, where he would confront not just the ignorance of bullies, but an entire administration spread thin across issues that mattered deeply. Would his efforts to rally support for Emily empower other children like her, or would it spotlight the painful truth of how alone they really were? Days passed with him submerged in a chaotic mix of planning and despair. The walls he'd built to keep doubt at bay began to crumble, revealing the raw fear he carried. Had he also inherited the weight of helplessness from his childhood? Could he convince this community that every child deserved not just to exist but to thrive, even when the chorus of negativity attempted to drown them out? As he prepared for the meeting, adrenaline surged through him, battling the icy grip of panic. His heart raced, thoughts colliding. When he flashed back to that image of Emily's tear-streaked face, the dread boiled over. He could either remain silent and allow the shadows to swallow her spirit, or light a fire with his words. As he stepped forward, the murmurs of dissent reached his ears, a prelude to the battle ahead. Would it be enough to protect his daughter or every silent child like her? The pressure ballooned, and as the town hall filled with voices, Mark knew the worst was yet to come. The room buzzed with palpable tension as Mark entered the town hall. Glares and hushed whispers filled the air, uncertainty lingering like an unwanted guest. He could feel the weight of every comment directed his way, a collective burden weighing down his resolve as he approached the podium. This gathering was not just another political necessity. It was a reckoning, the stage for a battle that extended well beyond his personal pain. The very future of his daughter and countless children like her hung in the balance. As he stood there, his palms slick with sweat, he searched for the words that had eluded him in the quiet moments of reflection. A lifetime of rehearsed presentations fell short in the face of this raw, personal truth. He recalled his history, remembered how he had forced himself to carry ambition like armor against the helplessness he swore he would never pass to his children. Yet, here he was, a grown man meeting the same helplessness, the same fear that paralyzed him as a child. The mayor finally called him to speak, and he steadied himself, looking out at the sea of faces that had once felt like allies, now transformed into a judgmental jury. What was he to say? How could one architect possibly challenge the mosaic of societal indifference? He took a breath. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice cracked slightly, finally breaking through the static noise of his mind. I stand here not as a businessman, but as a father whose heart aches in the face of his child's suffering. The words hung in the air, drawing some nods while others shifted uncomfortably. He continued, unveiling Emily's story, how she faced ridicule, not for her spirit, but for something entirely out of her control. He pushed back against their potential defensiveness, exposing the haunting reality behind the shadow of his daughter's existence. I've spent my life building homes that withstand storms. I thought I could create a shelter for my family, one free of the ghosts of our past. But how can I build a strong future for Emily when the very foundation of her experience is threatened? With each sentence, Mark felt a flicker of something, courage, perhaps. The crowd was still engaged, leaning in, and he sensed the gradual softening of hearts. He was giving them a choice, to empathize or ignore. Then he confronted the stark question that had gnawed at him throughout this ordeal. Is ignorance a choice we will make? Or can we choose understanding and kindness? The latest studies show that children who face bullying often retreat into silence, and in that silence, their potential is suffocated. We can start here today. He laid out his vision for a community plan to support children like Emily, to cultivate compassion alongside resilience within the schools, transforming places of education into sanctuaries where differences are celebrated, not ridiculed. As he spoke, something inside him began to shift. Hidden within his fear was a nascent strength, a dawning awareness that the architect's role extended beyond blueprints and design. Perhaps he was not only meant to build physical structures but to construct bridges of understanding between hearts. Finally, the moment loomed ominously before him, where he sensed he was at a tipping point. He yearned to see those disheartened faces spark with a glimmer of hope. As he finished his speech, he knew he couldn't return to the void he felt vulnerable in. He had opened the floodgates of his emotions, revealing the architect of his own spirit. The murmurs intensified, but he could not determine yet if those voices would rise in support or disdain. Would they leave him standing on a crumbling foundation or join him in the construction of a fortress against cruelty? As he left the podium and took his seat, his heart thudded in his chest. This meeting was merely the beginning. He still faced the critical outcome of not just this moment, but the collective choices of those gathered. Would those he had addressed recognize their power? Mark couldn't shake the feeling. Was he ready for the reverberating consequences of his vulnerability? Would he step back from the edge or leap into uncharted territories readily? The uncertainty unraveled before him, demanding a response. The confusion in the room was palpable. As Mark settled back into his seat, he felt the weight of their gaze press against him, an intense scrutiny that made his pulse race. He had poured his heart out in front of them, cracked open a well of familial vulnerability that he had previously kept sealed tight. Yet the silence that followed his speech was deafening, fraught with unspoken judgments. He shifted uneasily in his chair, grappling with the stirring mixture of hope and anxiety. It was as if he had thrown a stone into tranquil waters, and now the ripples were gradually expanding outward, revealing hidden depths yet to be explored. His thoughts spiraled back to Emily. Would this ever reach her? Could he genuinely shift the tide for her future? From the corner of his eye, he caught sight of a familiar face in the audience, Alice, a longtime friend and fellow architect, her brow furrowed as she scrutinized him intently. He could read the complexity of her emotions: concern, admiration, perhaps even disbelief. Their eyes locked momentarily, and in that brief exchange he understood her unasked questions. Was he brave, or was he putting everything he held dear at risk? Mark cursed his own fears. He had once thought himself invincible within the world of bricks and mortar, but now, standing in a breach of personal authenticity, he was beginning to realize that the stakes extended far beyond professional accolades. This was a battle for understanding, and understanding not just of his daughter's struggles but of the children who came after her. Heavy murmurs soon evolved into a buzz that rose to a crescendo, interspersed with emerging voices of agreement. Slowly but surely, the tide appeared to shift. Some people stood up, others began applauding, while others, still resistant, crossed their arms defiantly. Each reaction ignited a flicker of unforeseen determination within him. Encouraged, Mark's thoughts raced as he plotted his next move. If he had initiated this dialogue, he needed to steer it purposefully, not letting the conversation dissolve into casual pity. How could he seize this moment? He was familiar with structures and frameworks. Perhaps it was time to apply the same principles to this emerging discourse. He leaned over to Alice, whispering, "This community needs a chance for an honest dialogue. We can facilitate workshops and invite educators and families to open this space." His heart raced as he spoke, his mind buzzing with possibilities, crisscrossing pathways of connection he had previously been blind to. Alice nodded, the furrow in her brow softening as realization dawned. "You mean, like a design charrette for empathy? We could integrate student narratives to a showcase for sharing experiences." "Exactly," Mark replied a little too briskly. It struck him how they were now constructing an entirely different kind of blueprint. A blueprint for emotional resilience that intertwined with educational development. With renewed momentum, he envisioned an agenda, a series of meetups that would not only challenge individuals to share their own experiences, but also educate on the critical nature of compassion. He pictured spaces filled with collaborative discussions, where parents like him could connect and learn from others who had faced similar challenges. But beneath this burgeoning vision lurked a vital question. Would the community engage beyond this initial spark of interest? As he mulled this over, another realization hit him: it would require personal appeals that went beyond mere statistics. He'd need to unearth stories. Real stories with flesh and blood, joy and sorrow that echoed Emily's journey, sometimes gritty but ultimately hopeful. This was just the first step, he thought. He had opened a door, but the real work lay ahead. He was about to set foot on a treacherous path, one where vulnerability and purpose would collide. The need to showcase courage would remain at the forefront, resonating within him. As the murmurs quieted and the applause faded, Mark felt the path he required unfold before him, yet it felt fraught with peril. The moment that loomed ahead promised to test every ounce of his fortitude. Was he truly prepared to confront the societal truths that padded their lives in comfort, while dismissing discomforting realities? Determined, he squared his shoulders as the mayor approached the podium once more. The next agenda item would unveil an unexpected possibility, a pivotal moment where ideas could be challenged and tested. He sensed that the time had come to face those who would either elevate his vision or attempt to fracture it, and their resolve would soon become clear. What awaited him beyond this stage of vulnerability? Only a decision could unlock that door. But would he find the strength to step through? As the mayor began speaking, Mark fought hard to suppress a tidal wave of emotion. The applause still echoed in his ears, a mingling of support and skepticism that left him in an unsettling space. The questions he had posed were now circulating, woven into the very fabric of the room where professional titles and personal experiences intersected. Mark turned his focus inward, reflecting on the core of his message. What had he truly unleashed? The silence that loomed over his words had shifted, but it had not evaporated completely. An unspoken challenge hung in the air. Could he navigate this complex web of vulnerability without tumbling into chaos? He recognized the faces of his peers, the incredulity of some, the unwavering support of others. These were not just colleagues. They were collaborators, friends, and most importantly future advocates for his cause. He'd opened a door, but would they follow him through to participate in this potentially transformative journey? His thoughts spiraled back to Emily. She had always been his motivation, the spark that ignited a desire for a greater purpose beyond the machinations of his career. He felt an urgency to build a bridge between his professional identity and his fatherhood, something that had always felt so isolated before. This time, he would have to build it together with others. As he glanced around the room, the fervor of his convictions ignited. He envisioned a project that included hands-on workshops, interactive discussions, the real stories from caregivers, educators, and perhaps most importantly, The children who had graced the system, often marginalized by circumstances beyond their control. Each voice an integral piece of the solution, each narrative a brick in the new foundation he'd hoped to create. But how would he get there? That knowledge began to take shape as he took a pen from the table and absent-mindedly tapped it against his palm. He could strategize, map out a plan, but could he genuinely inspire those around him to shift from passive listeners to active participants? It demanded more than a well-laid-out proposal. It required emotional resonance, a pull that would make people willing to invest their time and their hearts into this endeavor. The key, he realized, was authenticity. He pondered how to balance professional integrity with his personal narrative. He would need to advocate for honesty, yet push himself to cast aside the armor he usually wore, the architect who dictated design rather than listening to the design itself. Perhaps this was the personal evolution he needed, to allow others to see him not just as a constructor of physical spaces but as a builder of empathetic, impactful environments. The mayor's voice faded into a hum as Mark continued to plan silently in his mind. He could gather testimonies, unraveling experiences in a way that would compel even the staunchest skeptics to lean in and listen. His heart raced at the challenge, but it also felt overwhelming. Every conversation could serve as a pivot point, every shared story could spark a connection. Then, a voice broke through his thoughts, rich with authority yet layered with compassion. It was Alice, standing at the edge of the dais, offering a chance for discussion. He could sense the weight of her words filling the void he had previously occupied. Their eyes met, and in that instant he acknowledged something profound, a shared reckoning that transcended their personal struggles. But uncertainty still nagged at him. What if his message fell flat? What if he exposed too much, only to invite derision instead of understanding? Those thoughts clawed at the edges of his confidence. As the mayor wrapped up the agenda, Mark steeled himself for what would follow. He was grappling not just with the conversation, but with the consequences of everything he was now about to reveal. Would his vision resonate? Or would the looming shadows of doubt cleave through his aspirations? Emboldened yet apprehensive, Mark stood as a surge of energy ran through him. The time had come to mobilize his vision, and the room was shifting, the tides adjusting to a new current. With every heartbeat, he approached the edge of transformation, a collective beginning that could fracture or fortify relationships defined by the complexities of their shared humanity. What awaited him at the center of this charge? A decisive moment that could either galvanize this assembly or fracture their connections. Each step he took felt like a roll of the dice, uncertain yet inevitable. Would he have the courage to unleash the truth that lay simmering beneath the surface? Mark took a deep breath, the weight of the moment pressing down on him with an intensity that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. He shifted his gaze from Alice back to the audience, and for a moment, he allowed himself to absorb the energy radiating from the crowd. Doubts battled within him, yet determination flickered like a flame. He had come too far to retreat now. He stepped forward, the polished wooden floor echoing his footsteps, a testament to his commitment to this journey. "Thank you, everyone," he began, his voice steady, though the tremble beneath it hinted at the emotion roiling inside. "I know I've presented challenges today, and I appreciate your patience as I share my vision." As he spoke, Mark felt an almost palpable shift in the atmosphere. Faces that once appeared closed off began to lean in, curiosity weaving its way into the expressions. The distance he had felt moments earlier seemed to shrink. His connection to the group was tangible, each sentence building a bridge he longed to cross. Yet he understood that vulnerability carried a risk. Would his sincerity disarm their skepticism, or would it expose him to ridicule? The stakes were immeasurably high. He could either foster understanding or ignite division. This had to be more than an appeal. It needed to bind them in a shared purpose. In the pursuit of transforming our perspectives, I want to invite you a call to arms, if you will, he continued, his voice rising. We need to listen to the stories that often go unheard. I believe that together we can give agency back to those voices. Mark glanced at the group, the mix of surprise and respect filling him with a powerful resolve. Yet the lingering voices of self-doubt whispered, what if they reject this? He tightened his grip around the podium, grounding himself in that physical connection. Some may see the children of the system solely as statistics. They are not. Each child is a narrative, a life rich with history, dreams, and needs. Can we afford to deny their struggles? His heart raced, thinking of Emily and how she often wore her emotions like armor. Personal stories have the capacity to change lives, and I want to create a mechanism where those truths can be shared openly. The more he spoke, the more he felt the desire to tear down the walls built between their professions and the beliefs that fueled them. He had to make them care, not just as professionals but as deeply invested individuals. Then he saw Sarah, known for her analytical rigor and historically cool demeanor, nodding slowly. The realization that she could resonate with his message brought a surge of hope. But he also spotted John crinkling his forehead, skepticism etched across his face. A knot formed in Mark's stomach, a reminder of the duality of acceptance and rejection he constantly navigated. Each conversation will require courage. It can be scary to confront the realities we prefer to overlook. But isn't that where true growth lies? The conviction in his words brought him a newfound sense of clarity. Here he was, in the face of fear, challenging himself to confront uncertainty head-on. The applause that followed his statement felt like an echo of what had been cultivated within him. He couldn't let it stop there. This was the moment to invite others into the fold, to articulate the collaboration that truly mattered. I'm asking you to join me. Let us create an experience for all of us to confront, share, and support the narratives that often go unheard. His heart thundered as he took a step back, waiting for their reaction. Mark had laid the groundwork not just for a project, but for a connection that could redefine their roles within the community. But what would happen now? Would they question the integrity of his intentions or embrace the call? As he stared into the faces of his colleagues, adrenaline coursing through him, Mark steeled himself for the response that would either deflate or elevate his aspirations. The atmosphere hummed with anticipation, each heartbeat marking the inescapable crisis he had initiated. Would this truth be the catalyst for change, or a prelude to confrontation? The moment hung delicately, and as murmurs began rippling across the room, he braced for what was yet to come. The murmurs cascaded through the room, a tide of uncertainty that washed over Mark. He swallowed hard, hoping his words had resonated, while silently wrestling with the possibility that he might have miscalculated. Sarah's nod conveyed approval, but John's skepticism loomed like a dark cloud. Would his earnest plea for compassion crumble in the face of scrutiny? Mark, Sarah finally spoke, her tone balanced, offering a glimmer of unity. You make a compelling point about perspective and storytelling. But how exactly do you propose we implement these ideas? Our current framework feels so rigid. The question landed like a stone, and Mark could feel the energy shift again. This was at the critical moment to articulate not just a vision, but a tangible plan. He had to reveal more than passion. He needed to demonstrate an actionable strategy. That's exactly what I want to explore with all of you, Mark replied, striving to maintain steadiness in his voice despite an internal whirlpool of anxiety. I'm envisioning workshops, focused discussions. We could even integrate storytelling sessions to give everyone a platform. His mind raced as he subconsciously reached for the podium again, embodying the notion that grounding himself would secure the trust he craved. And what about the resources? John interjected, his arms crossed tightly. Doesn't this require significant investment? We operate on limited budgets. You make it sound like we can just breeze through this at the drop of a hat. The challenge was bracing, a cold slap that pushed Mark to confront the financial logistics clouding his ambition. How could he inspire without a solid plan? He glanced around. The room felt like an arena, every gaze locking him into place. Yes, there will be costs. But think about the returns: a community that thrives and sees real benefits in understanding these narratives. We can consider sponsorships, grants, collaborations. The investment isn't just financial, it's emotional and professional growth for all of us. Mark felt a small surge of momentum as some of the tension in the room seemed to dissipate, replaced by nods of contemplation. He caught Sarah's eye, noticing a spark of intrigue that hadn't been there just moments before. Perhaps he was turning this ship around. Still, John pressed on. What if you're asking us to take a leap of faith without a safety net? People are resistant to change. Are we even prepared to handle that pushback? The tears of fear that bubbled in Mark's chest surged again. Honesty pierced through the veil of his professional facade. I know the fear of failure all too well, John, he admitted, his voice softer but resolute. But we're in a unique position. We have the opportunity to shift these paradigms, to set a precedent for how our work impacts not just the system, but the very lives of the children we serve. It won't be easy, but if we don't step forward, we're resigning ourselves to stagnation. This wasn't merely a professional endeavor for Mark. It struck deeply personal, igniting emotions tied to his own experiences with doubt and resilience. He could feel the intensity of the moment, the listeners drawing nearer, navigating the space of vulnerability mingled with hope. Yet, despite the flickers of acceptance, he sensed the invisible weight of resistance that still lingered. Something critical held back the collective breath of the room. Then the question remains, Mark. John's voice was steady, cutting to the core of the moment. Are you willing to put your ideals at risk? What if this doesn't succeed? Mark felt a rush of heat fill his face. The truth of his ambition surged forward, threading through every thought and impulse. The stakes felt towering, a reconciliation of his professional identity and personal one. A clear decision unfolded before him. He wouldn't let fear dictate his path. I am willing, he affirmed, the strength in his voice startling even him. I believe we have a responsibility to confront the narratives that shape our work. If I can't take that first leap, how can I ever inspire others to do so? A murmur of realization began to weave through the audience, filled with the tension of reconsideration. Perhaps he had unearthed something deeper, an inquiry that extended beyond the boardroom, beyond their roles. Would they find the courage to engage with their own fears? Mark held his breath, waiting for their response. The fine line between vulnerability and resilience stretched taut, but he sensed a shift, one that could ignite change. Would they join him in this leap, or retreat into the safety of their comfort zones? As silence enveloped the room, it became clear that Mark's journey was far from over. The replies were coming, but would they lift him higher or push him deeper into the unknown? The silence echoed, a heavy blanket draping over everyone in the room. Mark's heart raced as he scanned the faces, seeking even the faintest glimmer of support. He could feel every heartbeat pulse in time with his own anxiety, each second stretching unbearably. Then it happened. Sarah raised her hand, breaking the quiet, and all eyes fell upon her. What if we started small? She suggested, her voice steady and infused with rational optimism. A pilot workshop could test your ideas without overwhelming our resources. We could see if they resonate with the community before we dive into bigger investments. Mark's breath caught in his throat. This was exactly the opening he had been hoping for. Yes, a pilot. That could give us a taste of the impact these storytelling sessions could have, he agreed quickly, feeling a surge of excitement. The thought of a tangible step forward ignited a flicker of confidence within him. You mentioned community, John spoke, his tone slightly less combative. But what makes you think people will engage? They've grown accustomed to the status quo. The doubt stirred in the pit of Mark's stomach, but he pushed through. Because this isn't only about the method, it's about connection. People are yearning for something real, a way to relate their stories and feel seen. I've seen it in our interactions before. It just needs a catalyst, he asserted, this time more assuredly. The discussion unfolded like a chess match. Sarah's supportive remarks shifted to John's probing inquiries, with Mark strategically navigating the tension. The initial wall of skepticism cracked slowly, revealing glimpses of possibility. The prospect of taking small steps felt like a lifeline, his ambition steadily morphing into something actionable. But doubt loomed quietly just under the surface. Was he truly equipped to lead this charge? As the dialogue progressed, he confronted his insecurities in real time. What if these workshops failed? What if participants sat in stony silence, indifferent to his vision? Each doubt whispered to him, beckoning him to retreat behind the safety of professional expectations that felt increasingly suffocating. In that moment of introspection, The staggering weight of his personal experiences flooded back those moments of paralyzing fear and the sharp sting of rejection. The essence of what made him vulnerable also intertwined with his yearning for growth. He had to reframe these fears as challenges to confront. No longer could he allow anxiety to be a tether, it would instead become the very fuel for his resolve. "Mark," Sarah interrupted his reverie, pulling him back to the present. "What if we set clear metrics to gauge the success of these workshops? That way, we maintain accountability while exploring new territory." He nodded, enthusiasm flooding his thoughts as he grasped this opportunity. "Absolutely. We can quantify engagement through feedback surveys, attendance rates, and perhaps even follow-up interviews to understand lasting impact. It's a way to create structure within the creativity." The room seemed to stir with newfound energy, potential palpable in the atmosphere. Encouragement was starting to bloom, a collective admiration for the ambition that Mark had stirred within them. Yet, as this possibility blossomed, so did the intuition that his journey was just beginning. With every idea tossed around, Mark found himself standing on the precipice of something larger than tentative plans. He was summoning the courage to redefine the narrative of his professional journey. The fusion of ambition and vulnerability was no longer a tightrope walk but a pathway he was willing to tread. Then his gaze shifted to John. A contemplative expression hung on his face, suggesting that perhaps he was weighing acceptance against skepticism. "If we go ahead with this," John finally said, his voice measured, "you need to be prepared for the consequences, Mark. This is still a risk." The words struck Mark like lightning, igniting his resolve anew. "I know it's a risk, but what is the alternative? If we don't try, we confine ourselves to mediocrity. I can't let fear prevent us from evolving." The vibrations of tension surged back through the room as Mark took a deep breath, feeling strengthened by the clarity of purpose. Would his commitment resonate deeply enough to propel his colleagues toward a shared vision? In the fray of conflicting emotions, the outcome hung delicately in the balance. But as the dialogue continued, one thing became starkly clear: he would no longer shy away from the challenge of forging a new path. Mark sensed that his commitment would not only shape his professional evolution but also resonate with the very core of who he was. And that was the beginning of a transformative journey, one laden with uncertainty yet brimming with possibility. As he wrestled with the implications of his journey, a whisper of doubt surged again. What if this wasn't merely a leap for him, but a rallying cry that demanded he confront forces far deeper than he anticipated? Mark left the meeting room with his heart pounding, a maelstrom of emotions swirling within him. Although the dialogue had taken a turn toward collaboration, uncertainty shadowed his every thought. The words of his colleague echoed in his mind: "You need to be prepared for the consequences." The gravity of that statement lodged itself in his gut. What if success eluded him, leaving only the stark ramifications of his ambition? Navigating through the office corridors, Mark caught glimpses of his coworkers immersed in their routines, their faces a blend of concentration and complacency. He felt like an outsider, an intruder trying to shake up the mundane. Questions loomed larger than ever. All those years he had spent treading the waters of mediocrity had built a safety net woven from fear and indecision. Now, he was trying to ignite a spark amid a culture steeped in predictability. Back at his desk, Mark pored over his notes from the meeting, his hand trembling slightly as he traced the figures he had scribbled earlier. The metrics seemed hopeful, calculated paths to manifest change. Vision transformed to reality. He held such promise in his hands, yet undercurrents of dread threatened to shatter his resolve. What if the workshops yielded little interest? What if no one showed up? Determination surged as he suppressed those thoughts. His mind flickered back to Sarah's suggestions and the surprising support he'd received. That must have counted for something. But still, doubt tugged at him like a persistent shadow. He envisioned gathering participants, how he might lead them through their stories, yet the fear of failure leaned close, whispering scenarios of silence and disinterest. As he checked his watch, the notion of taking action took hold. Perhaps he needed to do something audacious to shake off the residual apprehension. Mark launched into the planning phase. He began drafting emails to potential participants, crafting messages infused with sincerity and urgency. His fingers flew across the keyboard, writing about the transformative potential of storytelling. The warmth of authenticity flooded his prose until he paused, realizing something crucial. He had been writing from a place of assumption. What if the stories he sought to draw out were clouded by his own expectations? Were the narratives he desired relevant to the people he was trying to reach? It was an important realization. He needed to engage with potential participants, understand their motivations, their needs. He decided to schedule informal conversations with colleagues and peers to gauge interest. Mark felt a slight comfort in this shift. Speaking about his ideas became an act of connection rather than a performance. Pushing past his fears, he drafted invitations. Open discussions centered on storytelling and personal experiences. Each message felt like a stepping stone, a chance to test his theory in real-time. As the day wore on, he reached out to his network, conscious of the weight each invitation carried. He knew this was more than just professional growth, it was personal. He craved an authentic exchange, one that could potentially redefine how he viewed himself within this organization. Then it struck him, an epiphany deepened by his commitment to this journey. Failure would be a companion, not an enemy. If he could embrace the possibility of falling short, the stakes no longer felt overwhelming. The real danger lay in remaining stagnant, caged by the boundaries he had constructed. This journey, however daunting, was about evolution. Suddenly, a knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. Sarah peeked in, her expression a mix of encouragement and anticipation. "I heard you were planning to talk to people about the workshops," she said, her energy infectious. "Do you want a sounding board?" "I'm in." An unexpected smile broke across Mark's face. He felt the weight lift slightly. Teaming up with Sarah presented an opportunity for richer dialogue and ally in this venture. Together, they could approach their colleagues, bolster the invitation with genuine enthusiasm. As they discussed their next steps, Mark sensed a shift. Cooperation sprouted, turning fear into momentum. With every plan set in motion, he began to question a new layer of his experience. While confronting ghosts of self-doubt, could this collaborative effort become a much larger vehicle for both of their growths? The prospect excited him, yet the intricacy of those feelings stirred caution. Would his partnership with Sarah eventually challenge deeper insecurities? The notion lingered in his mind as the day drew to a close. It had been a day of taking risks and unearthing possibilities, yet, in this dance of ambition and anxiety, a broader horizon awaited him. What other revelations would arise as they moved forward? The moment of truth loomed, ready to confront the layers of his identity still shrouded in uncertainty. Mark's anticipation hung in the air like an electric charge as he and Sarah crafted their strategy. Discussions flowed freely, ideas morphing into actionable plans, each statement echoing with the promise of transformation. The energy between them was palpable. They were not merely collaborators, they were pioneers on the precipice of change. As they finalized the format for their informal gatherings, a newfound clarity enveloped Mark. Each question posed by Sarah prompted deeper introspection. What stories were truly waiting to be unleashed? How could he coax out the narratives that held the potential to unearth both personal and organizational truths? In this dynamic environment, he began to see the opportunity for growth, not just for his colleagues, but for himself as well. The first step required him to confront his fears head-on. He committed to attending each session prepared, not as a teacher or visionary, but as a facilitator and empathetic listener poised to uncover the raw intricacies of his colleagues' experiences. This realization shifted his mindset dramatically. As he envisioned the workshops, he no longer perceived them solely as a measure of his success, but as a tapestry of shared vulnerabilities, each thread contributing to something greater than himself. The following days were a blur of preparation. Mark and Sarah strategically secured small meeting spaces, where the atmosphere would nurture open dialogue. Notifications flew as they invited colleagues, carefully selecting a diverse mix of individuals whose diverse experiences might spark the kind of stories they hoped to uncover. He felt nervous, but for the first time, the tremor in his hand was met with excitement instead of dread. The initial session approached, and Mark stood before a small group, the weight of expectation settling on his shoulders. The room buzzed with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. mirroring his own internal state. This was a crucible moment. Would he find the courage to guide the conversation? Would his colleagues feel safe to share their stories? With every passing minute, he reminded himself of the purpose behind this endeavor, not to be seen as a leader but as a community builder. The moment he introduced the idea of storytelling, a cautious atmosphere loosened slightly. As the first participant nervously shared her tale, Mark's heart raced, not with fear but an earnest commitment to ensure her voice was honored. As more stories emerged, something remarkable occurred. The narratives began weaving connections between the participants, illuminating not just personal struggles but also collective resilience. Mark felt the urge to share his own narrative, still raw and tinged with uncertainty, but hesitated. Was sharing his vulnerability the right move? Would it detract from the stories being told, or could it humanize him in a way that fortified those connections? The session continued, each voice building upon the last, and Mark reinvigorated a sense of agency within himself. He realized that every person present faced their own crossroads. They were united by their desire for growth, enlightenment, and connection. This realization prompted an urgent question: what if his own story could interlink with theirs and lead them all to deeper understanding? With newfound resolve, Mark decided to reveal a fragment of his experience. He voiced his own fears about stagnation and mediocrity, how these fears had almost paralyzed him. The room breathed collectively as his confession resonated. Empathy blossomed, and a striking intimacy bathed the ambience in warmth. As the session wrapped, Mark felt lighter. He had committed to this act of storytelling not as a mere facilitator, but as an integral part of the community he was striving to foster. The sense of connection intertwined with his emerging identity, the notion that he was a narrative architect, was becoming clearer. Yet, as he left the meeting, doubt crept back in. Would these sessions truly lead to the depth of change he envisioned? Could the courage he summoned change the trajectory of his career? He glanced at Sarah's approving smile and felt a flicker of hope, but even that glimmer was shadowed by uncertainty. As the days approached for the next gathering, anticipation loomed heavy on his soul. What would he face next in this journey of revelation? With every conversation, he sensed layers of his persona waiting to be uncovered, but the mere thought of exposure made him uneasy. There remained a darker element at play. Could he navigate the thin line between bravery and vulnerability, or would he stumble into a pit of insecurity? He needed answers, and they lay waiting just beyond the horizon of their next meeting. The days following the workshops felt like both a whirlwind and a profound shift for Mark. Each session had been a tapestry of shared experiences, unveiling the beauty and pain intertwined within their lives. Participants had revealed their vulnerabilities with surprising courage, and he had listened, empathized, and learned. It was in these moments he had found his footing, not only as an architect but as a builder of communities. With every session, Mark conquered his fears inch by inch. He stepped into his truth when sharing his story, realizing that vulnerability was not a weakness but a bridge connecting hearts. His colleagues began to respond, genuine conversations grew deeper. The workshop became a sacred space, one that morphed from individual narratives into a collective drive toward change. The community's response awakened a solidarity he yearned for, pushing him to continuously advocate for compassion and understanding. At their final session of this initial series, Mark stood before his colleagues, taking a moment to reflect on the journey. The palpable energy hung in the air as each face mirrored the growth that had taken root. Today, he began, his voice steady with newfound confidence, I want to talk about our next steps. Moments earlier, he had scrawled notes, filled with ideas that had sparked during difficult discussions. I propose we create an ongoing platform, one where we not only continue sharing stories but also connect with broader community initiatives. We can build empathy into the educational framework, and I want each of you to be part of this endeavor, he articulated, eyes bright with conviction. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation, faces lighting up in realization. From what had been a spiral of trepidation, the seeds of collaboration began to blossom purposefully. But he didn't stop there. He knew they needed a concrete structure to tether their aspirations. Mark spoke passionately about starting an annual storytelling festival, an event that would empower children like Emily, amplifying voices often silenced. It would showcase their experiences, intertwining art and education, while fostering an environment where differences were not merely tolerated but celebrated. The echoes of support suffused the room. Sarah's smile grew wide, affirming Mark's vision, and others chimed in with excited suggestions and ideas. The tension he had once sensed transformed into a palpable camaraderie. He had begun to prove that transformation could arise from vulnerability. As they discussed logistics, budget models, and community partnerships, Mark felt the tide shift further. His initial fears of rejection dulled in the face of validation. They were not just laboring on his vision, they were cementing a collective commitment to change. Mark's confidence had never been so robust. He had taken his childhood uncertainties and built upon them with resilient bricks of trust and empathy. Those moments of struggle had not only shaped him, they had unveiled the leader inside, proving that authenticity brings clarity. Weeks later, as they prepared to announce the festival, Mark received an unexpected message. The mayor had reached out, expressing interest in attending. Heart racing, he realized this could be monumental. Official support could broaden the festival's impact, could rally the entire community around this cause. He stood before the mirror, examining not just how he looked but who he had become. The timid architect was now a steadfast advocate. The leap into vulnerability had not driven him to the precipice of despair. Instead, it had propelled him into an empowering light. Finally confident in himself, Mark made his way to the town hall, where the mayor awaited. The anticipation surged within him. Would he forge vital connections that extended beyond his immediate circle? Would this be the opportunity to bring his vision to life? That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a sense of accomplishment washed over him. Mark was no longer just an architect of buildings, he had become an architect of dreams and narratives, committed to ensuring that every child's story was not only told but celebrated. It was time to embrace this journey fully, to advocate for Emily and every child like her. He had done more than transform his career, he had reshaped his legacy. This is the moment to show your support. You need to subscribe now, so you don't miss the next exclusive emotional stories that will inspire change. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and make a difference. Comment below with your reactions and theories about Mark's journey. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this incredible conclusion. Together, let us build a community that values every child's story.